Our second panel this morning will explore how Chinese Americans in philanthropy are making a difference in several fields and in many communities across the United States. In particular, Chinese American donors in philanthropy, both small and large donors, are making significant impact through their funding of many different nonprofit initiatives, including medical and health research, universities, and community organizations. And that's throughout the United States. Their charitable support has also significantly increased in China and in other continents. We have a very special opportunity to hear from three outstanding philanthropists this morning who will talk about their motivations and goals in their philanthropy. And it's a wonderful opportunity because Sue and Walter and Patrick don't often speak about their philanthropy. They do speak about other efforts, but this is really a rare occasion, so we really want to thank them. And again, let me introduce Sue Van, president of the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation. Let's give her a hand. Walter Wang, the president and CEO of J.M. Eagle. And Patrick Soon-Shiong, the chairman of the Chan Soon-Shiong Family Foundation. Patrick? And I'm Stewart Kwoh. I'm the executive director and president of the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, and also the domestic vice chair for the Committee of 100, literally my second job. So we have three reasons for having this philanthropy panel at our Committee of 100 conference. One is part of the mission of the Committee of 100 is encouraging the full participation of Chinese Americans in all aspects of American life. With over 4 million Chinese Americans today in the United States, the largest of all the Asian ethnic groups, totaling about 17 million people, there are more financially successful Chinese Americans giving back to communities. The Committee of 100 applauds this generosity and seeks to promote awareness of these values and activities. The second reason we're having this panel today stems from the Committee of 100's publication in 2009 entitled Still the Other. And in that, amongst the survey's recommendations by the Committee of 100 was that the most effective way for Asian Americans to combat the perception of being less patriotic and clannish and sticking together is to increase their profile in American society by increasing their civic engagement, including actively participating in political and community activities, increasing philanthropy, and enhancing visibility in government. And the third reason we're having this panel is to really look at some of the unique contributions of Chinese Americans in this field. Yes, these three Chinese Americans are giving back to communities, but it's not only through funding their contributions, but also with their ingenuity, creativity, and entrepreneurial skills. They are the first generation of major donors in the United States coming from the Chinese American community. And they have been successful in business and professions. And what's very interesting is they're using their talents that they learned in business and professions in seeking long-term solutions to our society's challenges. I must say I'm a little bit nervous because I'm the executive director of a nonprofit, and to be able to cut off major donors is very difficult. So bear with me. But I'm going to, and once again, we do have note cards at every seat, and judging from the swarms of people around our three philanthropists earlier, I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions. So towards the end of the panel, we will have monitors on both sides of the aisles coming forward, and please give your note cards to them. And again, we have the Twitter going on, so look at the bottom of the screen for the hashtag number C100 survey. So you can tweet some questions, and we'll collect the questions, and then we'll go from there. So let me introduce each one. I know in the morning we didn't have as long of an introduction, but so that the audience knows the backgrounds of our panelists, I'd like to just share a brief background in each person. One of the nervous parts is I got 3 pages on each of them, and I'm going to condense it to 3 or 4 paragraphs. Dr. Patrick Soong Chung was born in South Africa to parents who had emigrated there from China. He is married to Michelle B. Chan, who was also born in South Africa. They emigrated to Canada in the 1970s and in 1980 to Los Angeles, where they have lived ever since. Dr. Soon-Shiong is chairman of the Chan Soon-Shiong Family Foundation and chairman and CEO of the Chan Soon-Shiong Institute for Advanced Health, otherwise known as the CSS Institute. Also the Healthcare Transformation Institute, National Lambda Rail, and NantWorks, LLC. A physician, surgeon, and scientist, he has pioneered treatments for both diabetes and cancer, published over 100 scientific papers, and holds 50 US patents. And listening to him in the hallway just before the panel, I think he came up with another patent as we were talking. He has developed and sold 2 multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies, American Pharma Partners and Abraxis Bioscience. Through the CSS Institute, Dr. Soon-Shiong is working to create a national health information network for the secure sharing of biomedical information. He is supporting the development of various wireless technologies for the better management of chronic diseases, which would benefit all Americans. Dr. Soon-Shiong is ranked by Forbes as the wealthiest American in the healthcare industry. In 2010, he and his wife were among the first group to join Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett in the Giving Pledge, whereby some of the wealthiest Americans have undertaken to dedicate most of their wealth to philanthropy. But don't crowd him and ask for grants right after this session. Most recently, in March 2012, it was announced that the Chan Soon-Shiong Family Foundation had funded a new musculoskeletal science center at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica. Their foundation has already committed a total of over $135 million to a number of projects at St. John's. I'm going to introduce each speaker right before the first question. So Patrick, tell us in a few minutes, what is your motivation for doing all of this philanthropy at this stage in your life?
Well, first of all, it's an honor being here, and thank you for inviting me. I think, especially amongst the Asian community, it's really an opportunity for us to be an American. And if you look at an American way of life, it's probably one of the most charitable communities on the planet. I mean, an American ethic is very much not only to work hard, play hard, but also to give back. And I feel very much a Chinese American, and I'm not sure what I am actually, because I was born in Africa, I'm Asian, and I'm American, so that's a sort of 3 A's. But I truly feel there's an opportunity. I've been blessed as an immigrant, and all of us, most of us, are immigrants to this nation. And I don't think you can accomplish in any other planet than this country what we've been able to accomplish. And the opportunity to give back gives you much more than you actually really realize. So what we've motivated clearly is just a fundamental commitment as just part of who we are, that we want to give back. But how we give back is going to become a really important thing, because I think the opportunity then also to make an impact, not only for our family and our children, but also for the community around us, is such a great blessing. So that's really what motivates what we do.
Thank you, Patrick. Walter Wang is president and CEO of JM Eagle, Inc., the world's largest manufacturer of plastic pipes. Headquartered in Los Angeles, his company employs more than 1,600 people in 23 plants throughout the United States and Mexico. Walter's entrepreneurial and philanthropic endeavors are rooted in his family tradition of business excellence and community involvement with Formosa Plastics. Walter started his career at Formosa Plastics in Taiwan as a factory machinery operator on all shifts around the clock. I would have liked to see you work there, Walter.
I'm pretty good at sweeping the floors.
Walter went to UC Berkeley, and his wonderful wife Shirley went to UCLA. Over the years, Walter and Shirley have offered generosity and support to more than 15 philanthropic initiatives in disaster relief, clean water, cancer research, education, computer skills development, and combating domestic violence. Together, they have endowed several chairs at UCLA, as in the Asian American Studies Center, as well as endowed a chair at the Los Angeles Cedars-Sinai Pediatric Surgery Unit. Walter has been a leading supporter of efforts to bring clean water to communities in developing countries around the world, believing this is one of the essential needs to effectively address illness and poverty. So Walter's philanthropy has spanned several continents. As of 2010, JM Eagle has provided 350 miles of pipe, supplying 125,000 people with water in 8 African countries. The Wangs have also dedicated support to projects addressing pressing social and healthcare problems in China, including seed stage and ongoing support for the China AIDS Initiative, an awareness and prevention program. They have also been active supporters of the visual arts through documentary presentations, including The Blood of Yingzhou District, winner of the 2007 Academy Award for Best Short Documentary. Walter is a member of the Committee of 100 and a fellow co-chair of this conference. Welcome, Walter, again. So Walter, what is your motivation in giving so generously to communities, not only in the United States, but to China and Africa?
Well, I think my parents really influenced me a lot. I was always taught from young to give. My father and my mother always ingrained this giving heart. They always taught me that to give is really a privilege. And I can just go back a little bit further that, my father's father, my grandfather, this was in the 30s, right before World War II. Taiwan, a very small island, as all of you know, was very poor. Extreme poverty was very high. And my grandfather also was very poor. My father was very poor. But he would bring vagabonds, beggars off the street into his home because he has obviously no money to give. In that time in Taiwan, beggars are very different from beggars of today. That time, the beggars, most of them have, disease on their body, disease. And he would bring them home, and 7 or 8 at a time, and he would bathe them, clean them, give them food and clothing, and then let them go. So I think it's that generation of giving and education, and really that heart that gave me the motivation, because I saw it with my own eyes and what they have done. And I have to mention this: my grandfather is a very passionate, faithful Christian, and the Bible said that to be kind to the poor is like lending to the Lord. So I think my grandfather followed that and the teaching from God, and it went on for generations.
Thank you, Walter. Sue Van is head of the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation. She's president and chief executive officer. Sue was born in Shanghai, China, and immigrated to the United States at the age of 5. She is the eldest of 7 and was the first in her family to attend college. She earned a BA in political science from American University, an MA in international affairs from George Washington University, and she is a CPA. Prior to establishing the foundation, Sue was the executive vice president, chief financial officer, and treasurer of the Coulter Corporation, a leading global diagnostics company. As president and chief executive officer of the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation, the largest investment of the foundation's corpus supports translational research in biomedical engineering. By introducing industry best practices, this program accelerates these university-based innovations into practical advances that improve patient care. Additionally, the foundation collaborates with medical organizations to bring the latest education and standards of care to resource-limited nations. The foundation's newest initiative is its work with the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities to build a consortium that establishes a platform for dialogue and collaboration. The goal of this program is to form one cohesive community from these distinct groups to promote civic engagement and address health disparities. The common thread of all the foundation's programs is to focus on the underserved, underprivileged, and under-resourced by providing the risk capital to implement programs and initiatives that otherwise would not be possible. To give you a scope of the Wallace Coulter Foundation giving, since 1999, Sue has led the giving effort to give out over $350 million, and she plans over the next 10 years to give out another $300 million. Sue, not only motivation, but tell us your role in forming and running the Coulter Foundation, since you were the CFO and treasurer, and then you formed the foundation. Tell us about that.
Well, first I would like to introduce the name Wallace H. Coulter. Many of you, I'm sure, have never run across the name and don't really understand what he's famous for. Patrick perhaps might know the Coulter counter, sure. Okay? But I guarantee that each and every one of you have benefited from his invention. If you haven't gotten a blood test, which I'm sure most of us have, then you've eaten chocolate, drink beer, drink wine, drink milk. Did you ever wonder why the wine and the milk and the cream doesn't separate from the Bailey's Irish cream? Did you ever wonder about the toners or paint? All of those items. So Wallace's invention was the counting and sizing of microscopic particles suspended in a fluid. It is the gold reference method for over 500 consumer products. And that invention created the automated hematology industry. So for over 17 years, if somebody wanted a blood test, they could only get a Coulter counter. That is the benefactor and the origin of the foundation. The other thing that was unique about Coulter was that it was private. If any of you ever have a chance to work for a private company, do so, because there is nothing like a private company. You truly, truly worry about your customers. You worry about your employees. You worry about investing long term. And you don't worry about quarterly earnings or who else to please. And I have to tell you, it was a fantastic experience. So please do so. But the most important thing is that we had the same owners with the same vision, with the same strategy, with the same caring in reference to customers and employees for 40 years. There are very few entrepreneurs that take a business from a few $1 million to almost 800 million. Most entrepreneurs can handle to 5, 10, 15, maybe 20, maybe 100 million if we're lucky. And then professional management or Wall Street comes along. So it was a wonderful opportunity. I worked for that company for over 20 years, the second half of that 40 years. I had the great pleasure of working for the same owners, the same founders with the same vision to be the best in this industry and to take care of their customers. So as a diagnostic company, R&D is usually 8 to 12%. Our R&D was similar to pharmaceutical companies, 20 to 25%. So it wasn't like we made money every year, but we were definitely looking out for our customers and our employees. So that vision basically goes into the foundation. You're in California, so in 1997, the Coulter Foundation sold to Beckman Instruments, whose headquarters here is in Fullerton, California. So most of you will now know the company is Beckman Coulter. But for 40 years, it's amazing that a company could stick to its vision and strategic marketing and strategic planning in reference to taking care of its customers, taking care of their employees. And those were always the most important goals. So when the company was sold, there were two brothers that owned the company. All of Wallace's assets, personal, business, and otherwise, formed the corpus of the Coulter Foundation. And because I was the CFO of a private company, usually the owners of a private company's biggest asset is their company. Therefore, not only was I CFO, I was their personal estate planner. I was both of their brothers' personal trustee. And I became the trustee and formed the Wallace Coulter Foundation in 1998. And when he passed away in August of '98, his charitable remainder trust formed the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation. And here we are.
Thank you, Sue. So we've heard these wonderful motivations for their giving and philanthropy or their roles in setting up the foundations. So Patrick, why don't you tell us what your goals in your philanthropy are? What do you hope to achieve over the next number of years?
Well, I think, the ability to take your own intellectual capital as well as your financial capital and contribute both time and effort to try and make an impact, a lasting impact. So on our side, really, from our family's perspective, I think philosophically, really feel very strongly that our role is what we call a hand in and not a hand out. And there's a very big subtle difference to that, is actually to really find programs that you can not only stand up, but most importantly, make sustainable. So you'll notice that from our giving has been small and large, and regardless of whether it's small, relatively small, or large, we make 10-year commitments, very Asian-like commitments that if you identify a program that's actually meaningful, you want to actually have an impact that actually allows not only for it to stand up, but be sustainable and really have an impact on the entire community. So that's what we try to achieve, and it goes from science to education to health, and now, interestingly enough, sports and entertainment from a digital revolution perspective, where you can begin to blend the concept of philanthropy as well as infrastructural support to the community. And I think specifically for the Asian community, I'm very encouraged. You see the young kids today. They are beginning to blend in. You look at them from the opportunity for them to become truly part of the community. But they would need, at the one hand, a startup level. So I work with UCLA School of Business to actually induce entrepreneurship, because I think at the end of the day, so we created this Innovation Award and Entrepreneurial, all the way to working with Sister Rose in downtown East LA, who feeds 400 people a day. She's been doing that every day for 17 years, all the way to opening up, helping to help open up Martin Luther King, which is an infrastructure need for the community, to what we're doing with St. John's. And then at UCLA and at USC and at other universities, creating programs. So what we try to do is really look for missions that serve the cause of education, health, science, and try and support that.
Thank you. By the way, you see Patrick's face in a lot of newspaper articles nowadays because he's a part owner of the Lakers, Go Lakers, and also was a close bidder for the LA Dodgers.
Not a close bidder, a bidder, not a close bidder.
Okay. That's another panel, so we won't go over into that. Walter, you do so much in the U.S., China, and Africa. What are you hoping to achieve?
Well, first of all, I do really believe that there's so much we can do for the world. And I said earlier, it is really a privilege to give. And it's really a blessing also. I have to say this because, this is a C100 conference. I made, and Shirley and I made so many good friends, the C100, and we see our good friends, have such a huge heart to give, and we do learn from them a lot, like yourself and a lot of people sitting in this room. I think giving is to me, is a must, but how do we do it in a way that is long-lasting? How do we have legs, develop legs that, to walk down this path of life? Life is a journey. We walk one step at a time, left foot, right foot, and there is no shortcuts, and we gain wisdom through through this journey. I think one of the good examples is our Africa projects. Many years ago, I knew, just like all of you, that extreme poverty is really a huge problem in Africa. And one of the natural resources that is very lacking is really water and clean water. And then I'm in the water business. We manufacture pipe that really brings the essence of life to all the homes, a lot of homes in the world. And so I thought about, it wouldn't be that difficult to provide infrastructure for Africa to bring water to the villages. So I did some research, and it was through actually a C100 conference back in New York many, many years ago that went to a panel, and one of the panelists was Jeffrey Sachs. And he wrote this book about end to poverty, and one of the big sections there was water. So I asked Savio at that time to introduce me to Jeffrey, and I had a meeting with him, and I was naive in many ways, and I told Jeffrey that I have a solution to the water problem in Africa. He goes, "What's that?" And I say, "Well, Africa is not really good water deficient. It is infrastructure deficient. So there's got to be a good water source somewhere, a well underneath, aquifer. So we just have to pump that water from that source to the village. If it's 300 miles away, we can pipe it. If it is 15 miles away, 2,000 miles away, we can pipe it." So that's what we have done. And what Jeffrey told me that, "Well, Walter, you just solved the Africa water problem." So we identified the first job was in Senegal and in 8 countries you mentioned. So, I went to Africa many times, and really, I think philanthropy or charity, you have to be involved yourself. Giving money is great, but you have to really involve, like Patrick was saying, like Sue was saying. You have to be really involved. And so when I went to Africa, my eyes really opened up. I know Africa is very poor, but not this poor. Everyday life is backbreaking. It's backbreaking. So I didn't know until I went there, and I visited many schools, and 80% of the girls don't go on beyond an 8th grade education, because at 13 or 14, they were married off to support the family, and family couldn't feed them. And then I also found out that, the pregnant mothers, Chinese people or healthy Westerners always, when a woman's pregnant, you want to eat more nutritious, right? You want to eat more nutritious for the mother and for the baby. But in Africa, in many countries, it's the other way around. They eat less. The pregnant women eat less because they don't want the baby to be too big. All right, it's when the baby is born, is already undernourished, and you know, and they mothers feed the babies with the powdered milk mixed with brown water. It causes, you know, a lot of problems, a lot of death, and so I believe that really to do charity so it lasts, something that lasts a long time, you know, last 10, 20, 30 years. I believe this pipe can bring water to the villages for at least 100 years. So that's what I hope to continue to do in the future.
Thank you. Sue, what are your hopes in terms of accomplishments and goals? You have a wonderful diversity of giving, but share with the audience what are some of your goals?
Well, we have 3 main programs. One of them is translational research and biomedical engineering. For those of you who are researchers or scientific or technical or medical, I think you will understand that translational research is basically taking the inventions of discovery at a university or an institution and trying to put it into an industry process to be able to commercialize it so they become practical applications for the patient. And as we all know, most universities are basic research oriented. So when we tried to introduce translational research, I can't say it was really received well. And people would say, translational? That's partnering with industry. That's dirty. Commercialization? That's a dirty word. So we had a lot of, if you want to call it an uphill battle, to try to have the universities and their Office of Technology Transfer and so forth to try to adapt industry's best practices. And of course, being a CFO, people thinking I was a bean counter, that didn't help either. But the thing was that people didn't understand is I had the best mentor and coach and teacher in medical science and research, Wallace Coulter. So we brought industry's best practices. We introduced it to 10 universities. One of your neighbors here, Stanford, was one of them. And we did it in a very difficult time of recession and the economy. And as you know, venture capital was kind of tight. And I'm very pleased to say that after 4 years, of course, we audited all the results, but our schools did very well. So in a very difficult year, they were able to raise, I would say we had over 20-something licenses with industry, and I mean real industry, like General Electric or Johnson & Johnson. And then we had startups that were funded by what I call real money and real professional management, which is by venture capital. And we had a success about 150 million in a very difficult time. I think that when you work for a private company, which some of you may not know, you have to be fairly creative. You have to be creative, you have to be innovative, you have to be entrepreneurial, because the only people you have funding you is yourself. You fund yourself the old-fashioned way by making the money. And you fund yourself by having a banking relationship or providing operating funds for inventory and receivables. You don't create paper money. So as a private company, we didn't have that many resources in reference to financial management. So we kind of had to be creative. So our industry practices that we introduced to academia, we thought it could work. And I'm delighted to say that it worked well enough that the universities asked the Coulter Foundation to do a Translational Partners 2 program, which I was not originally intending to do. I thought 10 schools was enough. But anyway, we're delighted because we are helping a lot of researchers who want to do translational, who want to impact patient care, who want to improve the quality of life, are able to find funding, and not only funding, but we actually have a process that we take them through from the beginning to the end, and then we only let go when they get professional money. So that's one program. The second program is our relationship and partnership with biomedical societies, such as the American Hematologist Society of Hematology, the American Association of Clinical Chemistry, the American Association of Analytical Cytometry. These were societies that Coulter Corporation worked with because that was our field, hematology, cytometry, immunology. What they did for us was the fact that Coulter was always more than 50% international. And every company that's global wants to be more than 50% international. And when I started the foundation, I thought I would like to do 50% of the philanthropy overseas, but it was just too difficult and too much oversight, and I wanted to keep the foundation staff small, and wanted to keep it lean, and wanted to keep it efficient. So decided the best way was to, in fact, to partner with these biomedical societies. Most of them were, well, they were all American-centric, they were all American-focused. They were 50, 60 years old and never had a conference overseas. So we gave them what we call the risk capital, because they would not use their own capital to take a conference overseas. So these organizations will bring the best of their annual scientific abstracts, education, and other standards of care to the resource-limited countries. And as an example, partnership with the American Society of Hematology, we've asked them to look after Asia and after Latin America, and our association in partnership with the European Hematology Association, we've asked them to take care of Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe. That way, we don't lose sight that the American societies have actually, absolutely, the state-of-the-art technology, the state-of-the-art training, the state-of-the-art education. And we have an obligation, when you are number one, to do the best we can to support the customers and patients outside of the US borders. So that's the program for the biomedical societies. How I came up on the Asian program was basically by accident. Even though I was born in China, I came here when I was small. And when I came here in '52, believe it or not, there weren't that many Chinese and Asians. In '52, there were maybe around 20,000 Asians in New York, and maybe 200,000. And that was because of the Chinese Exclusion Act from the late 1800s. And the population of Chinese and Asians really did not grow to the way we know about it till 1970s. So I came here, I was lucky. My father was a US soldier because he was a seaman from China, and when the war was going on, he happened to be in the United States, so he enlisted. So we came here because he was a US soldier. But when we got here, there were no such things as community-based organizations. There were no grassroots social services to help immigrants. So I remember that we kind of had to do it ourselves. I remember when I was 6 years old, and my mother took me kind of screaming and kicking to argue with the landlord because the heater had broken in our apartment. I remember translating for her in reference to her doctors because she was pregnant. I remember helping her through the grocery store. And somehow, somewhere along the way, I had kind of forgotten. I just kind of assumed if I achieved the American dream, then probably all the Chinese and Asians in America achieved the American dream. I mean, after all, I wasn't the smartest and the brightest of all of them. I figured if I can work hard, they can work hard. So I never really got engaged in the Asian community. But I met Mr. Stewart Kwoh on November 2nd. I was told that he was Mr. Asian America, which I had no idea what that meant. So we had a difficulty getting together, and he was like so busy he didn't have time for me. So finally, I said, Mr. Asian America, I would suggest that you make time for me. So that I said, I don't think you will be sorry. So I met him on November 2nd, and I told him, you have 4 hours, Stewart, to teach me everything you want me to know about the Asian community. And if you had one wish at the wishing well, what would it be? He said, the census. And I said, the census? The census? It's a piece of paper. What do you mean, the census? And he said, Sue, there's over 50 different ethnic groups, and there's over 80 different dialects and languages. And I have to tell you that I was stunned, because for the first time, I understood the magic of the word Asian American. I always introduce myself as Chinese American. I mean, if I introduce myself as Asian American, the next question is, and where are you from? So I thought that was kind of wasting my energy. And I thought, wow. I said, Asian American, wow. I said, now I understand. Now I understand the use of that word. Now I understand why it needs to be embraced. Now I understand why it needs to be supported. And I said to him, okay, I understand. I guess I'm Asian American. Therefore, I understand that perhaps why the Asian American community doesn't get the support from mainstream corporations or foundations. They only get perhaps less than 1% of mainstream philanthropy. That's because who can understand an Asian American except an Asian American? We know that we can't speak Korean or Japanese or Thai. We know we have to speak to each other in English. So it's probably quite confusing for mainstream funders. And he was explaining to me that in the Census 2000, there were like over 30 million in California to support it. In 2010, because of the recession in the economy, there were only 3 million. And they weren't going to Asian Americans because the group was just so fragmented, so disorganized, and really couldn't work together. So we said, okay, I think they can work together. So the strategy for that program was, because I came from a private company, because we were a leader in the world global market, I said we have to get the money to the community-based organizations. After all, they're the foot soldiers. They're the ones who can get everybody counted. They're the ones who can deliver the one count. So I think because of Stewart getting me involved in the Asian community, I'm told that we had probably the best accurate count so far in the 2010 census of this very difficult, disparate community. And through our organization and our collaboration and our partnership, I had basically national partners, regional partners, and local partners, but there was a consortium of about 150 community-based organizations in the United States for the first time working together to get counted. So that's the origin of the Asian American program.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, other than embarrassing me. So the panelists, Patrick, Walter, and Sue, have talked about some of their lessons, long-lasting support, sharing wisdom, and gaining wisdom from those whom we serve, involving yourself, getting really involved, using our creativity and collaborating with others. What do you hope for from other Chinese American or Asian American donors? What is your hope that, do you want partners? Do you want to see them do anything in particular? Patrick?
Well, you know, it's interesting. As I said, this is the first meeting I've ever had in the C100, and very much we've done it's interesting. When I went to the Buffett Giving Pledge meeting, the idea there in my mind was, and it may not have turned out to be that case, but maybe that was a little Pollyannish of me, was to find like-minded, wealthy, high net worth, wealthy people who collectively can make a much larger collective contribution, because integrating resources, scarce resources, not just from the money, but from the intellectual capacity, the connections, the networking. And it really hasn't, frankly, happened from that perspective. So we just went on our own way as our own family foundation and found it easier to move faster, very much like I hear from Sue. I'm very impressed by the programs that Sue's doing in terms of the missions and programs that we think we could add, not only intellectual capital, but time. I think the time and the commitment to the effort is as valuable, even maybe not more valuable, than the money you bring. But having said that, for example, if Sue's doing translational research, we're doing translational research, I'm funding California Nanosystems Institute, I'm funding something at USC, I'm funding something at University of Arizona. Is that an effective way of doing it if we all sort of collectively were going after a mission? And for example, the mission right now we're going after is cancer, which actually crosses translational research, crosses communications, crosses fiber, crosses supercomputing, crosses wireless technology, crosses method of Coulter counting because it's cancer stem cells. I looked at that particular issue as a problem and said, okay, we have this particular problem. And if you analyze that problem, and if I may, if you've got time, I can just give you the outlines of the analysis of that problem. and as well as a solution for us as mankind. Right now, in this particular audience, or any audience, if you go to see a doctor for cancer care or any care right now, the chances are you, and the statistic is true, that you can get the right diagnosis, right treatment, either under or over treatment, is 35 to 40%, in which you will get the wrong treatment, wrong diagnosis, which is a very, 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 very scary thought, meaning that it's a flip of the coin. And the reason for that is not because they're bad doctors or stupid doctors, or is that the information that is now coming in now is such overload of information that the doctors cannot literally keep up. So with information overload in the form of cancer, that decision-making process is life or death. If one had pancreatic cancer today and spread throughout the body, most people would say that standards of care is this one drug called gemcitabine, and if you look at the package insert of that, the response rate is 0 and the death rate is in 2 months. Yet, if you had a blood test and were of a particular subtype, which is like 70% of those patients with pancreatic cancer, and you got onto this particular drug, you would actually have complete remission and alive in 6 years still. We have patients going that way. How is it possible that by the grace of God, you actually got this treatment versus that treatment? So the issue then, if we dissect the problem out, was you needed supercomputing, you needed informatics, you needed point of care, you needed the knowledge of engineers, bioinformatics, you needed access to clinical trials, you needed nanotechnology. And so it was a problem so huge that no one single person could take this on. And like idiots, we decided we would take this on. And quite frankly, we've now, what's very exciting, and that's, we just made a press release yesterday with, we now brought in partners like Verizon. We've created a supercomputer infrastructure across the United States because the opportunity now is to take a blood test, put it through the sequencing devices, and actually know exactly what ails a person. The problem is one single blood test is equivalent to 500 gigabits of data. That's 2 hard drives of one computer, which means you can move the data around, so which means we needed to create a fiber. So we created the National Lambda Rail, which is 12,000 miles of fiber across the United States. Then once you have the data moved around, you can only, right now, the United States government takes 8 weeks to do the analysis of one patient, except you're dead in 8 weeks. So you need the result in 24 hours. So we've built that streaming system so you can have the results in 24 hours. Now that you have this result in 24 hours, you need to know what drug. So you need to go to the pharma companies to make sure that all the drugs that's available, it's 1,000 drugs currently in development. So we're doing all of that, and what's going to be exciting in July, we will announce, in fact, that the entire infrastructure in the United States is up and everything is going to be running, and we're going to make the streaming thing available free to the country. But now we need a union of forces of philanthropists, like-minded philanthropists, to say translational medicine at its ultimate core, where we take the universities, the medical centers, the entrepreneurs, the pharmaceutical companies, the communications companies, the fiber infrastructure, and put it together. And I think the Asian community who understands this, who understand what you're doing in Africa and which is long-term infrastructure. I hear of large philanthropic organizations who say, our goal is not to build capacity. I think that's totally wrong. I think our goal is to build capacity. So for example, the Global Health Initiative in Africa, we're funding with a gentleman, Dr. Haile Debas, who's Ethiopian and really my old mentor. And he's actually helping women actually build chickens so they can have eggs, so they can have high proteins. That is capacity. Not a lot of money, but important, and we're funding that. So to that level, all the way to this most sophisticated level, if we collectively, and I must say, take advantage of your Asian, take advantage of the fact that we're mathematics and science, we're good at that. Pull that together in terms of a human capital and put your resources together in a collective fund that goes to a common cause. I think that would be a wonderful thing. And maybe that's what C100 can indeed pull together. This being my first meeting, I shouldn't be presumptuous to say that, but I think that's an opportunity for C100.
Thank you. Walter, what are your hopes for other donors?
Well, first of all, Patrick, I would very much like to be involved with this, what you're doing. I'm listening very carefully because I was a fourth stage cancer survivor, yeah, it's been 6 years ago, thank God. I was, before the panel discussion, I was asked by a reporter that, she said to me that, well, there's kind of a strong perception in our country that Asian Americans are not givers. We're not, charitable. And I said to her, basically, that's just untrue. That's just not at all. It's just untrue. But you have to look at our history that, Asian Americans, came to wealth, the last, 20, 30 years. So really that last 20, 30 years, I think Asian Americans have gave a lot to this country and to the world. I think anybody in business or in your own profession, you all know that it is a responsibility to give. It is a responsibility to give. And I think God has implanted that DNA in all of our souls and our hearts. So, if we look into ourselves, we will find that, it feels really good. It feels really good to give. And there's so many needs in this world. There's more and more, I think, that there's more and more opportunities to give. And of course, we have to find the best way to do it. That is, again, long-lasting. But take China, for example. We know that China, of course, is the second largest economy in the world. The last 20 years, a lot of Chinese are becoming very wealthy. Right now, the challenge is that we as a part of a human being and Americans to how do we influence that the Chinese, the wealth to also to give and do it the right way, because we have a lot more experience and a lot more history. So I think that's important, and I think that when we gather the power of people over the planet to be able to do what is right, I think this world is obviously going to be a better place. Like it's jokingly, Miss America will always say, we want world peace. And how do we create world peace? We create world peace by, human beings helping each other. And especially if capacity I think it's the key, is to put the team of well-to-do people together and find the best way to make the most impact in quantity, in the yield, highest yield, in the most efficient way. And the shortest time possible. Time is of the essence. I think we're running out of time, and I think Asian community should be more organized and be together to make sure that is done in the world.
Thank you, Walter. Sue, do you have a comment on your hopes? And then we'll go to questions.
I really applaud the Committee of 100 for the very challenging job you have for the next 20 years. If you thought it was hard the last 20 years, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because first of all, China's not going to stop growing. It's going to continue being powerful. It's continue to develop. India, Southeast Asia, maybe the 21st century is the century of Asia. So to be perfectly candid, you do have a very difficult job in reference to ensuring that the bridge between two nations allow for open dialogue and open communications. And that's a very big challenge. But in order to provide that bridge with a solid foundation, we have to invest in the Asian community in the United States. Each and every one of us in this room have definitely achieved some level of the American dream. If we do not help other Chinese or other Asians in the United States, then we have no one to blame but ourselves on why the Asian community is weak or fragmented or do not coalesce into a cohesive community. In order to make sure that Asian Americans have a seat at the table and to make sure that they have a voice to be heard, we have to build up this community. We have to partner to make sure that the national, regional, and local Asian organizations who are leaders can hold up the community as a whole. But we have to do it together. I'm sure you've heard that a rising tide lifts all boats. We can't just be the influence. We can't just be the successful ones, only us, because that's not enough power, that's not enough influence, not enough activity in people to get that voice and to get the seat at the table. So I would say that the Committee of 100, you have a wonderful vision and you have a wonderful mission. And it would be absolutely wonderful from the point of view that if the Chinese are 4 million of the 17, and perhaps we were the first generation that came here and were able to be the successful and professional successes and entrepreneurs and business people, then we have the knowledge, we have the experience, and we know how to help the Asian community in reference to strategic and entrepreneurial philanthropy. And we need to attack it with a long-term vision. I absolutely agree with Patrick. This foundation is committed to, it started with the 2010 census, it is committed to support the 2020 census, and hopefully along the way, we could all work together to have Asian Americans become citizens so that they can vote, so they can participate in the census, so they can participate in the civil engagement, so they can volunteer, so they themselves can turn around and, having achieved the American dream, to be philanthropists. Being American means giving back. I agree with Patrick. I think we're lucky that we're here. We've been given opportunities. In so many countries, it doesn't matter how hard you work, it doesn't matter how many jobs you work at, you will never be able to penetrate the social and political barriers. The access is limited. So we're lucky, we made it, but there's hundreds of thousands of other Asians, and we know it, that haven't made it. And we will never have the influence in this community or in this United States if we don't group together in reference to the community as a whole. So I would say that it would be wonderful if the Committee of 100, because you have such influential, respected, successful people as your members, to also understand that we can be leaders here. We can be leaders into the Asian community. It is fragmented, it is not supported by mainstream corporations and mainstream foundations. We need to help this community. We're from this community. We will understand the needs of this community better than most. And we will never get the voice and never a seat at the table unless all the community, the Asian American community in the United States, becomes a cohesive group.
Well, we're going to go to questions, but I think there's been such wonderful comments. Let's give the panelists a hand. Oh, there's so many questions, but I'm going to... How much time do we have? 10 minutes? Okay. Okay, how can you evaluate and measure the impact of investments, both shorter term and longer term? Do you want me to read all the questions first, or do you want to go one at a time? Let me just read all the questions first, and then you pick what you're most interested in. It is a pleasure to hear the panel talk about long-term thinking. How do you think about measuring success is a long-term giving program? So there's several questions that are clumped together around measurement. How can philanthropy create meaningful impact in America's failing public education system? Because the Asian American and Pacific Islander community is so splintered and divided by Asian languages, how can smaller nonprofits get their own community access to funding and not fall through the cracks? What can be done to increase the spirit of advocacy, and how can the media be an important factor? How can the younger generation make the most impact in philanthropy, for example, for-profit social businesses? Philanthropy inside China has been growing substantially, but remains hampered by red tape. Do you have experience or knowledge of or particular examples that you can share with us? Can you, as foundations and philanthropists, help advise CBOs, community-based organizations, to consolidate and strategize to form alliances to maximize the impact of giving and outcomes? The panel spoke about their belief in the Asian American community's ability to work together despite the wide range of diversity and ethnicities. What do you think the shared goal and objectives are of the collective Asian American community, and are they effective in bridging the wide range of interest across ethnicities? Is philanthropy in China different from what it is in the United States in terms of style, beneficiaries, and implementation? Wow. This is a whole conference. So I'm going to go in reverse order, and you, in our 10 minutes, you are going to impart your wisdom on whatever struck you as something you want to respond to.
Regarding philanthropy in China. Wallace went to Georgia Tech, so Georgia Tech had started two international ventures, one with Beijing University, the Biomedical Engineering Department, and one with Shanghai Jiaotong University, which was a dual master's degree in electrical and computer engineering. I wanted to support their international initiatives, but I didn't want it to be free. So I gave them, both of them, a challenge grant. They didn't like that very much. They said, just give us the money, Sue. What do you mean a challenge grant? We can't raise money in China. We don't know how to raise money in China. We're engineers. I said, trust me, challenge grant, you'll do fine. Well, now I think I've created some Frankensteins, because I have to tell you that the challenge grant mechanism works fantastic over there. They have accomplished much more than they would ever accomplish, because everybody likes to double their investment. And the challenge grant works there, and they're going to be using it. I hear that the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Finance like that concept, and that they may be doing a test case among some of the universities, that they may match the funds they raise themselves. So as time goes on, we all know no government can support education in its entirety. So the education systems in China, they're going to be going toward donations and philanthropy, just like the education systems in the United States. I have to tell you, Challenge Grant works, and I've also used that mechanism in my domestic Asian partners. In fact, at this point right now, I guess I have, I think, about 4 partners right now with $10 million challenge grants going on in a couple of years. I imagine we'll double that in challenge grants. And that gets the board involved. Because many of the boards in the Asian community have not been donating and have not been leading the charge as far as donations and philanthropy and strategic entrepreneurship and fundraising. And the challenge grant is fantastic, and one should think about that.
Thank you, Sue. Walter?
Well, I think if you want to measure the impact of philanthropy, I think it's quite simple. It's calculating how many people's lives have you affected. How much have you done? How many people's lives have you helped? At the end of the day, it's how many people we have helped. We have, in our planet, we have over 7 billion people. And I think, at the end of the day, it's all about human relationships. We have relationship with our friends, our family, and our spouse, and many others. Is using that relationship. It goes back to if you ask about the China, it's about what kind of leadership and people that you can influence and really put together to achieve a successful charitable giving. One example, a very good one, I don't know if David Ho, are you here? Everybody knows David. And what he has done in China is, and all over the world on AIDS is just amazing. Many years ago, there was an AIDS conference in China, and President Clinton was invited to speak. And there was health ministers and leaders of China standing on the podium. And at the end of the speech, the young Chinese man raised his hand, well, you can't end the conference this way without hearing something from a AIDS victim. And so President Clinton invited him, this young man, to come up to the podium and address the crowd. And then he brought, this young man infected with AIDS, with the ministers, and they shook hands. And from that point on, the government has given a lot of free medication to the people who are affected with AIDS. So it's about bringing people together, bringing the right people together. And I'm sure all of you in this room, many, many people around the world, can have that influence and can bring the right people together to do the right things for philanthropy, for the world.
Okay, Walter. Patrick, last word.
Well, whenever I go to these meetings or conferences, I think at the end of the day, you spend a lot of people come and listen, and we spend a lot of time. And at the end of the day, pragmatically and practically, you would all ask yourself, or should ask yourself, well, what did I get out of that? And was it worth the time I spent? I got to tell you what's interesting to me, just sitting here thinking about this. What is the census in California of China, of Asian Americans? What is the census about? How many people are there?
There's roughly 1.5 million Chinese Americans in California.
So if you take just California, because I think at the end of the day, the opportunity to actually just do something, as opposed to have these meetings and talk about it, is if you take Los Angeles is a microcosm of the nation. California is a microcosm of the nation. And the Asian community on the West Coast, there truly is an opportunity. You look at all these questions. The question is, how do these, there's a Thai and there's a Korean and Vietnamese, and very small organizations. And if you look down at Long Beach, for example, we did, and the very, very poor communities who are Asian, how can they be helped? In other words, how could we really, as C100, or you as C100, really do something? So there really is an opportunity here, and I know some members in the audience who could maybe create a body and contribute real dollars to a body that then could become the mentoring body, and the I'm Hakka, in the Chinese way of actually giving, is to create a little community part that supports everybody else, and it's a Chinese way of actually supporting. So maybe what can come out of this is, at least for this meeting, and from what I hear about what you're doing, you're already creating a census opportunity, is to create a body that would be like-minded people trying to figure out a system for people to reach out to. That then could be the kernel for advocacy, and I think absolutely you need to stand up as at the end of the day, from a long-term perspective, a political body in the United States first, to sort of say, okay, the Hispanics are going to do this, the Jewish organizations are doing this very successfully, and rightly so. And so Asian has this opportunity, but who's going to do that? You need leadership, and the leadership can come from this business of philanthropy, but then the business of philanthropy can reach out into entrepreneurship, because that's exactly what the Chinese and the Asians and Japanese could be very good in. Then I had this question about how do you use media and how do you use the young people, because young people are struggling. But they're smart and they're young and they're American. And you look at people like Jeremy Lin. Now you can clearly use the media in a very positive light. He's a good kid. And I believe one of the things I want to start building is a whole entity called Character in Competition, in which you take high school, college, NBA, NCAA, Olympics, and actually create an entity in which sports could be the catalyst for the inner city kids to participate and induce them to come in and actually get not only just education, but sports training, sports performance, physical therapy, all the way through. and create what we call character in competition. So these are the kinds of things where you bring the young people and the media in. So this is the thing, that's why I was late this morning, because I'm actually creating this organization right now, and that's was the beginning of the Sports Institute. There's a big master plan around that. So I think from a practical perspective, to answer this question, the question was, how do you bring media, how do you bring young people, how do you bring the small, because the worst thing you can do is call yourself Asian American and then just support the Chinese and the Japanese. We need to support them, the truly the underserved. And maybe that's what can come out of this conference.
Good.
Thank you. Wow, that was really, I took a lot of notes myself, and I'm moderator. But anyway, I just want to thank Patrick, Walter, and Sue. Their comments were really, truly inspiring, and more importantly, their actions have been inspiring. So let's thank them all for their wonderful work.